How long have people been drinking tea? This is exactly what we're going to find out as we take a deep dive into tea history. We're going to be dissecting ancient texts, legends, and artifacts to find out what role tea played throughout history. We'll also see how tea has evolved over the years to become what we know it as today. With so many legends surrounding tea, it's hard to tell when it really started. There is a famous Chinese myth where in 2737 BC, Emperor Shen would sip hot water underneath a tree, and one day the wind blew the leaves into his cup. He remarked on the flavor and restorative properties of this drink and began to advocate for its use, and this is where tea was born. But if we want to stick to what we can prove, we'll have to jump ahead to the 2nd century BC. Before we do that, I just wanted to mention that this tea history lesson is just a short excerpt from our book, Secrets of Japanese Green Tea. If you want to get all 100 pages of this book, you can get it for free when you click the link in the description. Now let's go back in time to the 2nd century BC. So the earliest physical records of tea were found as recently as 2016 in the mausoleum of Emperor Jing of Han. This indicates that tea was consumed by emperors as far back as the 2nd century BCE, with credible written records suggesting it was drunk much earlier. No one knows for sure when tea was first consumed as a stimulant, but in 220 AD, in a medical text, Shi Lun by Hu To, which stated to drink bitter tea constantly makes one think better. This enhanced concentration provided by tea drinking made it very useful to the Chinese monks. Now we travel forward in time to the 8th century AD. This is where the history of tea in Japan really began. The earliest records of tea consumption in Japan date back to the 8th century. During this time, the city of Nara was the first permanent capital of Japan, and Chinese teas were consumed by the monks and by the emperor. It was common for Buddhist monks and diplomats to take trips to China and bring back cultural practices as well as literature and art to share with people in Japan. Tea was one of the practices that made its way from China to Japan. The monks were among the first to consume tea in early Japan and found that the tea helped them stay calm and alert during long periods of meditation. We now know that this is due to the combination of caffeine and L-theanine, which is almost unique to the tea plant. The L-theanine stimulates alpha brainwave activity, which are the same brainwaves stimulated during meditation. Jumping forward to the 12th century AD, the history of tea in Japan really began to get interesting. This is where tea started to be grown on the islands. Although there are records of tea being consumed in Japan as early as the 8th century, the first record of the tea being cultivated in Japan wasn't until 1191, when the monk Eisai brought back tea seeds from China and planted them on the grounds of Kozanji Temple outside of Kyoto. This temple is in the Toganoo Mountains, and Toganoo tea was once considered the finest tea in all of Japan, and many only considered the tea real if it was grown in this area. The history of tea in Japan began to transition from the temples to the rest of the country. In 1211, Eisai wrote the book Kissa Yojiki on the health benefits of tea, and for the first time, people other than monks and emperors began to take notice. In 1214, Eisai introduced tea to the samurai class. The value of tea to the samurai was originally limited to helping cure their hangovers, but later they accepted it once they embraced the principles of Zen Buddhism. Tea and Zen Buddhism were often intertwined throughout history. Dogen even included notes on serving tea during Buddhist rituals, and Muso Soseki even stated that tea and Zen are one. In the 13th century AD, as we start to enter the medieval period of Japanese history, tea became a symbol of status among warriors and high society. Before the development of the modern tea ceremony, tea was seen as an opportunity for the upper classes to showcase their wealth. They held gatherings in opulent tea houses around Kyoto to showcase their exotic tea and teaware. This can be seen in the story of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa, in the primary residence of Ginkakuji, or the Silver Pavilion, outside of Kyoto. It was here that he hosted tea gatherings of the upper classes to showcase his knowledge of tea and his expensive teaware in a gold-plated tea room. It was here that the Japanese tea ceremony history began, but it would need to undergo a radical transformation in order to become what we recognize it as today. Soon, a man known as Sen no Rikyu came along with a more humble vision for the tea ceremony. Each tea ceremony would follow a theme, and that theme is simply conveyed through the use of a flower arrangement and a scroll. For example, the theme of a tea ceremony could be wood, and the flower arrangement conveys the leaves beginning to fall from the trees. The scroll on the wall expresses the intention of cleansing our hearts before the upcoming winter season. The theme of wood is also conveyed in the objects used in the tea ceremony. There is an incense holder made from bamboo gathered around uji. The rest of the objects are used for the preparation of ceremonial matcha. During the 17th century, the tea ceremony became an institution, reinforcing 4 principles: wa, ke, se, jaku. These principles were demonstrated through the ritualistic preparation of matcha tea. First, we have wa, or harmony. The first step of the tea ceremony begins not when you walk inside the tea house, but actually on the path leading up to it. While walking along this path, guests purify their hearts and their thoughts to leave their worldly worries behind. The next concept is ke, or respect. The guests need to respect all things, regardless of their status or position in life. This is demonstrated at the entrance of the tea room, where guests crawl through a small door. In doing so, the guests must bow before entering into the tea room, regardless of their station. Samurai must bow, emperors must bow, and commoners must bow. Inside the tea room, all guests are equal. The third concept, se, or purity, is demonstrated by the tea master once the guests enter the tea room. Through a series of refined movements, the tea master cleans and purifies the utensils used in the ceremony. Finally, after all 3 concepts are discovered and embraced, all people in the tea ceremony can embody jaku, or tranquility. This was the vision that Sen no Rikyu had for the tea ceremony, and his teachings still live on, not only inside the tea room, but outside as well. The tea used in the Japanese tea ceremony of the Middle Ages was matcha, but now we mostly drink sencha, or leaf tea. So when did this transition take place? Well, for hundreds of years, Uji was the main hub for tea cultivation in early Japan, and it still maintains much of that status today, particularly for matcha. Many tourists come to Uji every year, both to take part in tea ceremonies at Teowan Tea House and to visit the many matcha shops between Uji Station and Byodo-in Temple. They also come to learn the history of green tea in Japan. In the surrounding areas of Ogura and Uji Towara, there are also many historical sites that commemorate the invention of Sencha and Gyokuro tea. In the 1500s and 1600s, matcha was the primary way to consume green tea in Japan, but all that changed with the invention of Nagatani Soen. This tea grower in Uji discovered that rather than grinding the tea leaves into a powder, they could be steamed, rolled, and dried to maintain their flavor for long periods of time. They could then be prepared in a teapot and poured into a cup. This discovery allowed Nagatani Soen to popularize the use of Sencha tea, now by far the most common type of green tea in Japan. The childhood home of Nagatani Soen is now a popular tourist attraction, and a nearby shrine was built to commemorate his discovery of Sencha in 1737. Larger Japanese tea companies fund the upkeep of this shrine in order to pay their respects to the father of modern Japanese green tea. Like most things, the history of tea in Japan changed radically during the Industrial Revolution. An important discovery in the history of Japanese green tea happened at a small site in Ogura. A tea merchant by the name Yamamoto Kahei had traveled around Japan to study tea cultivation, and he noticed that certain family farms would cover their tea plants to protect them from the cold. By cutting off the sunlight from the tea plants, it actually made the tea sweeter. He began to implement this method, and in 1841, he created a long shaded tea that developed a green residue during the production process. He named this tea Gyokuro, or jade dew, and it would soon become the most sought-after leaf tea in Japan. Gyokuro has a strong, sweet and savory flavor, a high caffeine content, and a high theanine content. It's known as the Emperor's Tea because it was once the tea of choice for the Emperor himself. Before we move on to the next important discovery, if you're enjoying this video so far, it would really mean a lot to us if you could like it and subscribe to our channel to see more tea videos in the future. Now let's talk about the 20th century. So in the early 20th century, another important tea production method was discovered, and that was roasting. This practice began in Kyoto and later spread out to all of Japan. By roasting the teas, farmers and producers were able to create a completely unique tasting experience, playing off these warmer notes of coffee, caramel, and chocolate. Starting in the mid-20th century, the tea production process in Japan became more industrialized. The harvesting of the tea could now be done by machine, and so could the steaming, rolling, and drying. This allowed the farmers to produce more tea more efficiently and with less manual labor. Certain tea factories in Japan are almost completely automated, taking in fresh leaves and moving them through the production with a series of conveyor belts. Jumping ahead to the modern day, it seems that there's no end in sight for the ingenuity of Japan when it comes to tea. The most common way to consume tea in Japan is now in bottled form. These ready-to-drink teas are sold in vending machines on virtually every street corner in Tokyo. They keep the drinks hot in the winter and cool in the summer. Although these teas aren't anything close to freshly brewed loose-leaf tea, these unsweetened bottled teas commonly outsell sugary soft drinks, which is quite an accomplishment. This shows that the love of tea in modern society isn't going away anytime soon. If you want to try any of the teas we mentioned in the videos, it would really mean a lot to us if you could go to neoteas.com and browse our selection of premium Japanese green tea. After traveling around Japan for the past few years, we've met with dozens of different farmers and sampled hundreds of different types of teas. We've ultimately selected a few of our favorites, and we're so happy to share them with all of you, with free shipping options worldwide. If you want to get our book, Secrets of Japanese Green Tea, for free, you can just click the link in the description and we'd be happy to send it to you. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next time.